I was working 16-hour days to provide for my wife and newborn when my brother-in-law called with devastating news. My wife Jessica was having an affair with my best friend and business partner David, and they were planning to take everything I'd built. What I did next destroyed both their lives and left them bankrupt. My name is Michael, and I thought I understood what betrayal meant until my own family taught me otherwise. I was 32 years old, married to my college sweetheart Jessica for 7 years, and we had just welcomed our first child, a beautiful baby girl named Sophie. I owned a successful construction business that I'd built from nothing, working 16-hour days for years to provide for my family. Jessica was a pediatric nurse, and we seemed to have everything figured out. We just bought our dream house. In the suburbs, complete with a white picket fence and a nursery painted soft yellow that Jessica had spent weeks perfecting, life was good, or so I thought. The first sign something was wrong came 3 months after Sophie was born. I'd been working on a major commercial project downtown, 30-story office building that would set my company up for years if I landed. The contract was worth $2 million, the biggest deal of my career, and I was putting in crazy hours to make sure everything went perfectly. Jessica had been understanding about my long days, or at least that's what I thought. Kiss me goodbye in the morning and have dinner waiting when I got home late at night. She'd take care of Sophie's night feedings so I could sleep, always telling me how proud she was of my hard work. I should have seen the signs, but I was too focused on providing for our family to notice that my wife was pulling away from me. It started with small things. Jessica stopped asking about my day. She'd be on her phone constantly, texting and smiling at messages that she'd quickly hide when I walked into the room. She started going out with her girlfriends more often, leaving Sophie with me on the weekends when I finally had time off. When I suggested we hire a babysitter and go on a date night, she always had an excuse. She was tired. She had plans with friends. She needed to catch up on sleep. I told myself it was normal, that new mothers needed time to adjust, that once things settled down with work and the baby, we'd get back to normal. But things didn't get back to normal. They got worse. The project downtown was reaching its final phase, which meant even more pressure and longer hours. I was at the construction site one evening, going over blueprints with my foreman Danny, when my phone rang. It was my brother-in-law, Jessica's older brother Mike, who worked as a bartender. Downtown. "Hey, Michael, I need to talk to you about something," he said, his voice sounding strange. "Can you meet me after work?" I could hear the tension in his voice, and my stomach dropped. Is everything okay? Is Jessica all right? Is Sophie okay? "They're fine physically," he said. "But Michael, there's something you need to know. Can you come to Murphy's bar around 10? I get off work then. The rest of my evening was a blur. Couldn't concentrate on anything. Kept making mistakes on calculations I'd done 1,000 times before. Danny finally told me to go home early. That whatever was eating at me was going to cause an accident on the job site. I met Mike at Murphy's bar, a dive bar downtown that was practically empty on a Tuesday night. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days, and he ordered 2 whiskeys the moment I sat down. I don't know how to tell you this. He started downing his drink in one gulp. I've been wrestling with it for weeks. Jessica's my sister, and I love her. But what she's doing to you is wrong. My blood went cold. What is she doing to me, Mike? He signaled the bartender for another round. She's having an affair, Michael. Has been for about 2 months now. Seen them together, and it's not just physical. She talks about leaving. About starting over with this guy. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Who? I managed to ask. Who is she seeing? Mike looked even more uncomfortable. It's the worst part, man. It's your business partner, David. Your best friend since high school? The guy who was your best man at your wedding? If Mike had told me Jessica was having an affair with a stranger, it would have been devastating. But David Rodriguez had been my best friend since we were 15 years old. We'd started the construction business together 5 years ago, splitting everything 50-50. He was Sophie's godfather. Came to our house for dinner every Sunday. He'd been there when Sophie was born, celebrating in the hospital waiting room with champagne. He knew everything about my marriage, my finances, my dreams for the future. And he was using all of that knowledge to steal my wife and destroy my life. Are you sure? I asked, even though I could see in Mike's eyes that he was certain. I've seen them together 3 times in the past 2 weeks, he said. Once at that new Italian restaurant on 5th Street, once at the Marriott downtown, and once at his apartment. They weren't trying to hide it, Michael. They were holding hands, kissing, acting like a couple. Jessica was wearing that red dress. You bought her for your anniversary? The red dress detail hit me harder than anything else. I'd saved up for months to buy Jessica that dress for our 5th anniversary. Taking her to the same restaurant where we'd had our first date, she'd told me it made her feel beautiful, special, loved, and she was wearing it for another man, for my best friend. There's more, Mike said quietly. Jessica's been talking to our mom about divorce lawyers. She thinks you're too focused on work, that you don't pay enough attention to her or Sophie. She says David makes her feel appreciated in ways you never did. I felt like I was going to be sick. How long have you known? I suspected something was going on about a month ago. When I saw them having coffee together downtown, Jessica told me they were just talking about getting you a surprise for your birthday. But something felt off. Then I started paying more attention, and the pieces came together. I'm sorry, Michael. I know I should have told you sooner, but I kept hoping I was wrong. I thanked Mike for telling me and drove home in a daze. It was almost midnight when I got there, and Jessica was already in bed. I stood in the doorway of Sophie's nursery, watching my 3-month-old daughter sleep peacefully, completely unaware that her world was about to be turned upside down. She was so beautiful, so perfect, and the thought of losing daily access to her because of Jessica's betrayal was almost unbearable. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my home office thinking about all the signs I'd missed. David had been coming around more often lately, always with some excuse about business or wanting to see Sophie. Jessica had been dressing nicer. When she went out, wearing makeup even for quick trips to the grocery store, she'd started working out again, saying she wanted to lose the baby weight. But now I realized she was trying to look good for him. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in years and told Danny to handle things at the job site. I needed to know the extent of the betrayal, needed to understand what I was really dealing with. I hired the same private investigator that one of my clients had used during his divorce, a former police detective named Carol who specialized in infidelity cases. I gave her photos of Jessica and David, their schedules, their usual hangout spots, and asked her to document everything. While I waited for Carol's report, I started paying closer attention to Jessica's behavior. I noticed how she'd light up when her phone buzzed, how she'd disappear into the bathroom or the laundry room to take certain calls. I noticed how she'd mention David's name casually in conversation, talking about funny things he'd said or interesting stories he'd told her. She was falling in love with him right in front of me, and I'd been too blind to see it. The breaking point came a week later. I'd told Jessica I was working late on the downtown project, but actually I'd finished early and decided to come home and surprise her. Maybe take her out to dinner, spend some quality time together, try to reconnect with my wife. Instead, I found David's truck in my driveway. I sat in my car for a moment trying to process what I was seeing. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe there was a business emergency. Maybe David was just checking on Jessica and Sophie while I was at work. But deep down, I knew. I used my key to enter through the front door as quietly as possible. The house was dark except for the light coming from our bedroom upstairs. I could hear voices, laughter, intimate conversation. My wife and my best friend were in my bed in the house I'd bought with my own money, probably making plans for their future together while my daughter slept in the next room. I stood at the bottom of the stairs for what felt like hours, listening to them talk about me, about how I was always working, how I didn't appreciate Jessica, how I took her for granted. David was telling her that she deserved better, that he would treat her like a queen, that they could build a life together. Jessica was talking about the divorce, about custody arrangements, about how she wanted to wait until after I finished the downtown project so she could get a bigger settlement. They were planning my destruction in intimate detail, and they were enjoying every minute of it. I finally crept back outside and sat in my car, shaking with rage and heartbreak. These two people, The person I'd pledged my life to and the friend I'd trusted with everything had been systematically planning to destroy me. They'd been laughing about it, strategizing about it, getting off on the betrayal. I started the engine and drove around for hours trying to figure out what to do next. I could go back in there and confront them, but that would just lead to a screaming match and give them time to cover their tracks. I could wait until morning and act like nothing happened, but I didn't think I could look either of them in the eye without losing it. Instead, I decided to be smarter than they were. If they wanted to play games, I was going to make sure I won. The next morning, I acted completely normal. I kissed Jessica goodbye, told her I loved her, and asked David to meet me at the office. To discuss the downtown project, showed up looking nervous, probably wondering if I suspected anything, but I kept things completely professional. "David, I need to talk to you about something important," I said, closing the office door behind him. "I've been thinking about the future of our partnership." He relaxed, probably thinking this was about business expansion or profit sharing. "What's on your mind, Mike?" "I want to buy you out," I said. "I've been offered some major contracts. That would require me to take on full ownership of the company. I know it's sudden, but I think it would be best for both of us." David looked confused. "Buy me out, Michael? We built this company together. It's as much mine as it is yours." "I know, and I'm prepared to pay you fair market value for your half," I said. "I've had the business appraised, and I can offer you $800,000 for your 50% stake. It's actually more than market value considering our current contracts and overhead." $800,000 was a fortune to David, more money than he'd ever seen in his life. It was also exactly what I needed him to take. "I don't understand," he said. "Why now? Is everything okay between us?" I looked him straight in the eye, this man who'd been my best friend for 17 years, who I'd trusted with my business, my secrets, my family. "Everything's fine, David. I just think it's time for us to go our separate ways. You can start your own company, be your own boss. Think of it as an opportunity." He was quiet for a long time, probably trying to figure out if this had anything to do with Jessica. Finally greed went out over suspicion. "When would this happen?" "I'd like to have everything finalized within 2 weeks," I said. "My lawyer can draw up the paperwork today. Cash payment, clean break." David agreed, probably thinking that $800,000 would be perfect for starting a new life with Jessica. He had no idea that I was about to make sure that money disappeared as quickly as he'd gotten it. While David was signing over his half of the business, I was putting the second part of my plan into motion. Carol, the private investigator, had given me a comprehensive report on Jessica and David's affair. Photos of them together, recordings of their phone conversations, financial records showing that Jessica had been spending our joint account, money on expensive lingerie and gifts for David. She'd even been using our credit card to pay for hotel rooms. But the most damaging piece of evidence was a recording of Jessica talking to David about her plans for the divorce. She wanted full custody of Sophie, half of everything I owned, and alimony payments that would set her up for life. She was planning to claim that I was an absent father who cared more about work than family, that I was emotionally abusive and controlling. She'd been building a case against me for months, documenting every time I worked late, every time I was tired when I got home, every argument we'd had about money or schedules. David was coaching her through it, helping her strategize about how to maximize her settlement. They were planning to take everything I'd worked for and use it to build their new life together. The recording was particularly devastating because Jessica talked about how easy it had been to manipulate me, how I was so focused on providing for our family that I never noticed what was happening right under my nose. She laughed about how I'd actually been funding their affair with my own credit cards, paying for the hotel rooms where they planned my downfall. But I had one advantage they didn't know about. I understood money and business better than both of them combined. David might have been my partner, but I'd always handled the financial side of our company. I knew where every dollar came from and where every dollar went. And I'd been very careful over the years to structure our business in a way that protected my personal assets. The $800,000 I was paying David was coming from a business account, not from my personal savings. And due to some very clever legal structuring that David had never bothered to understand, that payment was going to be considered taxable income for him. $800,000 in taxable income meant David would owe the government almost $300,000 in taxes. Money he didn't have, because he'd already spent most of his payout on a down payment for a house he and Jessica were planning to move into after our divorce. 2 weeks after David signed the buyout papers, I came home early from work again. This time I didn't sneak around. I walked through the front door and called out for Jessica. "Honey, I'm home. Where are you?" Jessica came downstairs looking flustered, her hair messy and her clothes wrinkled. "Michael, you're early. I thought you were working until 8 tonight." "I decided to surprise you," I said, sitting down at the kitchen table. "We need to talk." The color drained from her face. "About what?" I pulled out a manila folder full of Carol's evidence and spread it across the table. Photos of Jessica and David together, transcripts of their phone conversations, credit card statements highlighting their affair expenses. "About your relationship with David, about your plans to divorce me and take everything I've worked for, and about the lies you've been telling everyone about what kind of husband and father I am." Jessica stared at the evidence in shock, then tried to deny everything. "Michael, this isn't what it looks like. David and I are just friends. These photos are taken out of context." I played the recording of her and David discussing the divorce strategy, her voice clearly audible as she talked about taking me for everything I was worth. She listened to her own words, her face getting paler with each passing minute. "How did you get this?" she whispered. "It doesn't matter how I got it," I said. "What matters is that I know the truth about who you really are and what you've been planning. You've been lying to me for months, Jessica, using my money to fund your affair, planning to destroy my relationship with my daughter, plotting to take everything I've built, all while pretending to be a loving wife and mother." Jessica started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration that her plan had been discovered. "You don't understand, Michael. You're never here. You work all the time, raising Sophie by myself while you chase your dreams. I've been working to provide for our family." I shot back. "Everything I do is for you and Sophie. I bought us this house. I pay for your car, your clothes, your phone, everything. And you repay me by sleeping with my best friend and planning to steal half of everything I've earned?" "David appreciates me," she said. "He makes time for me. He listens to me. He treats me like I matter." "David has been using you to get to my business and my money," I said. "Did you really think he fell in love with you? He's been planning this as much as you have, Jessica? You're both getting exactly what you deserve." I handed her divorce papers that I'd had prepared. "I'm filing for divorce on grounds of adultery. I have enough evidence to prove infidelity, which means you get nothing beyond basic child support. No alimony, no half of my assets, no comfortable settlement to start your new life with David." Jessica's tears turned to anger. "You can't do this. I have rights. Sophie needs her mother." I agreed. "But she needs a mother who's stable and honest. Not one who lies and cheats and uses her own daughter as a pawn in a revenge scheme against her father. I'm filing for primary custody." "You'll never get custody," Jessica screamed. "I'm her mother. I take care of her every day." "You mean you take care of her when you're not sneaking around with David?" I said. "A judge is going to be very interested to hear about how you've been having an affair while caring for an infant. How you've been spending your daughter's college fund money on hotel rooms with another man." Over the next few months, the divorce proceedings were exactly as brutal as I'd expected them to be. Jessica hired an expensive lawyer with money she borrowed from her parents, trying to paint me as an absent workaholic father who cared more about money than family. But Carol's evidence was too comprehensive to overcome. The judge was particularly disgusted by the recordings of Jessica planning to lie about me being abusive, and by the financial evidence showing that she'd been stealing from our joint accounts to fund her affair. I was awarded primary custody of Sophie, Jessica getting supervised visitation until she could prove she was in a stable living situation. I got to keep the house, my business, and my personal assets. Jessica was entitled to child support, but nothing else. The judge made it clear that her adultery and financial deception had voided any claim she might have had to spousal support or property division. But the real satisfaction came from watching Jessica and David's relationship implode under the pressure. David had quit his job at our company, expecting to live off the $800,000 buyout. But when tax season came around, he discovered that he owed almost $300,000 in taxes. Money he'd already spent on the house, the new truck he'd bought, the expensive engagement ring he'd purchased for Jessica. Tried to get a loan to pay the taxes, but his credit wasn't good enough for that kind of money. The IRS put a lien on everything he owned, including the house he and Jessica were living in. David blamed Jessica for the tax situation, claiming that if she'd been smarter about the divorce timeline, they could have avoided the financial disaster. Jessica blamed David for not understanding the tax implications of the buyout. They started fighting constantly, their dream life together turning into a nightmare of debt and legal problems. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, Jessica was living in a studio apartment across town, working double shifts at the hospital to pay her legal bills and child support obligations. She'd had to sell her car and move in with a roommate she found on Craigslist. David had filed for bankruptcy and moved back in with his parents at age 31. The house they'd bought together was foreclosed on, their credit destroyed for years to come. I heard through mutual friends that they'd broken up after David got arrested for tax evasion. Apparently he'd tried to hide assets from the IRS and gotten caught. Jessica wanted nothing to do with him after that, finally realizing that he was more interested in money than he was in her. A year after the divorce, I met Sarah at Sophie's daycare. She was a single mother whose ex-husband had moved across the country for work, leaving her to raise their son alone. Sarah was everything Jessica had never been: honest, loyal, genuinely interested in building a family rather than tearing one apart. We took things slowly, both of us having been burned by unfaithful spouses, but eventually she and her son moved in with Sophie and me. Sophie adored Sarah and her little boy Marcus, and Sarah treated Sophie like her own daughter. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony at the beach, with Sophie as our flower girl and Marcus as the ring bearer. Jessica attended the wedding not as a guest, but as Sophie's mother, dropping her off for the weekend. She looked tired and older, like the stress of the past few years had aged her prematurely. She barely spoke to me, just handed over Sophie's overnight bag and left quickly. Felt nothing when I saw her. No anger, no sadness, just indifference. She was Sophie's mother, and I would always respect that relationship. But she was nothing more to me than a cautionary tale about the dangers of betraying the people who love you. David sent a wedding card which surprised me. Inside, he'd written a note. "Michael, I know I can never make up for what I did to you and your family. I was selfish and stupid, and I lost the best friend I ever had. I hope you find the happiness you deserve with Sarah. Take care of Sophie, David." I threw the card away without responding. Some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness, and some friendships can never be repaired. 3 years after my divorce from Jessica, I was at Sophie's 6th birthday party when I realized how much my life had changed. Sarah was in the kitchen, with the other mothers laughing and sharing parenting stories. Sophie was playing with Marcus and her friends in the backyard, completely happy and secure in her blended family. My parents were there, along with Sarah's parents, all of them doting on the grandchildren and getting along beautifully. Jessica arrived to pick up Sophie after the party, as per our custody arrangement. She looked better than she had in years, more put together and less stressed. I later found out through mutual friends that she'd been dating a divorced teacher from Sophie's school. Someone stable and kind who treated her well. I was genuinely happy for her. Not because I still loved her, but because Sophie deserved to have a mother who was emotionally stable and in a healthy relationship. The party looked like fun, Jessica said as Sophie gathered her things. Sophie's been talking about it all week. She had a great time, I said. Sarah made the cake from scratch, and all the kids loved the bouncy house. Jessica nodded, watching. Sarah through the kitchen window as she cleaned up with the other mothers. She seems nice. Sophie talks about her a lot. She is nice, I said. She's good to Sophie, and Sophie loves her. There was an awkward silence for a moment. Then Jessica spoke quietly. "Sorry, Michael, for everything. I know, it's too late for us, but I want you to know that I realize what I threw away. You were a good husband, and I was too immature to appreciate what we had." "Thank you for saying that," I said. "I hope you're happy now, Jessica. I really do." Sophie deserves to have both her parents in good places in their lives. She nodded and called for Sophie to say goodbye. As I watched them drive away, Sarah came up behind me and put her arms around my waist. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Everything's perfect," I said, and I meant it. That night, after we'd put the kids to bed and cleaned up the party mess, Sarah and I sat on our back porch with a glass of wine, watching the stars come out. "Do you ever regret how everything happened?" she asked. "The divorce, the custody battle, all of it?" I thought about her question carefully. "Regret that Sophie had to go through her parents' divorce," I said. "I regret that she doesn't get to live with both her parents every day. But do I regret discovering the truth about Jessica and David? No. Do I regret standing up for myself and fighting for my daughter? Absolutely not." "And do you regret that it led you to me?" Sarah asked with a smile. I pulled her closer to me. "That's the one thing I'll never regret, you and Marcus. This family we've built together, it's everything I never knew I wanted. Jessica and David thought they were destroying my life, but they actually gave me the chance to build something better." Sarah kissed me gently. "I love you, Michael. Love the man you are, the father you are, the way you fight for the people you care about. I love you too," I said, more than I ever thought possible. As we sat there together, I reflected on everything that had happened. Jessica's betrayal had been devastating at the time, but it had also shown me what I was capable of surviving. David's friendship had been a lie, but losing it had taught me the difference between real loyalty and fake friendship. The financial and emotional cost of the divorce had been huge, but it had led me to Sarah and Marcus. To a family built on honesty and mutual respect, rather than obligation and routine. Sometimes the worst betrayal leads to the best outcome. Not because the betrayal wasn't real or painful, but because it forces you to rebuild your life on a stronger foundation. It shows you what you're truly worth, what you're willing to fight, for what kind of person you really are when everything's on the line. Jessica and David taught me that I was stronger than I thought, more resilient than I knew, more deserving of real love than I'd ever believed. Their betrayal was the catalyst that transformed my life from something comfortable but complacent into something truly meaningful and fulfilling. And for that, in a strange way, I was almost grateful.